Here we go. Begin with the end in mind. So I guess an analogy I would sometimes use with this, we're in London right now. We want to get to Manchester. Fantastic place, Manchester. Used to live there. So if you go from London to Manchester, it's helpful if you know that your end result is to be in Manchester. Is that fair? Yeah. So if you find yourself in, Liverpool, didn't work out the way you wanted it to, because your objective was to be in Manchester. So you're setting that example, you're setting that what does good look like ahead of time. I think that some of that comes down to the culture as well. So this soldiers versus Smurfs, it's a nice little way to kind of characterize it sometimes, where I've worked on many programs where you have seasoned consultants come in. So the board makes a decision, we're going to do this program. They hire a big consultancy to come in, they bring in IT specialists, and they just assume that it will get done, right? The business assumes that it'll just happen. But you have to really get the board on board. Now, you're all here, so I'm presuming that if you're on the board, you're happy to be on the board, then you'll have colleagues on the board. But it is important to make sure that for every of the areas that you're going to have impacted by this, that you have a C-level exec present. That's really one good way to get coverage and build the support that you need. So I've unfortunately been on programs where I have to phone up the exec on the golf course because I haven't seen this exec in months. And they just think this program is just happening somewhere in the background. I'm like, hey, we need to go live. Can you please come in? Please come in. That's not going to work. If you have HR and finance as an example in a program, you need to have the CPO, on the board, the CFO on the board, on the steerco for this program, because they are the ones that are going to help to drive the change that's needed with their lives. So when you're looking at the budget, look at what needs to be done beforehand. There is a big target operating model component to this stuff. These SaaS applications have a very particular way of working, and that's what makes them so powerful. They have, maybe there's a 5-step process for procurement. That's a global standard, and that's how it's built. You can tweak it a little bit, but it's 5 steps. If your current organization operates on 10 steps, 5's coming out. That means there's going to be some impact on how people work. See the big picture. So again, this is looking at that double counting, looking at the other programs that are going on. You may have different programs that may not appear to be related, but it is important to have a portfolio function in the organization that looks at these different things. And again, I've been in lots of organizations where you mention portfolio and you kind of get these blank stares. It's helpful to have a mechanism to look at not just the list of programs, but what are the objectives, what departments do each of these programs impact, and most importantly, what are the benefits that each one of these programs is supposed to be generating. And then that'll kind of allow you to work out kind of a heat map of who and where is affected. Otherwise, you'll end up eventually having a car crash, or one organization, one department's doing one thing and it's going to clash. The impact of that update patch that you just got. So typically you need to have 3 things in motion in your service operating model. One is a group of tech folks that are actually running some tests, just running your scripts, just to make sure that nothing broke. That's really key, right? There'll be a bunch of new features that came through. Someone needs to kind of check that list, make sure, okay, yeah, this is all right, nothing's breaking. Second thing is you need to have someone from the business. This is a team from the business that works in the business that is seconded over part-time, or there's other models where you can outsource it or whatever, but it needs to be someone in the business that's also testing this. And they're doing that against the established business processes. So through the course of the program, if you, for example, move from that 10-step procurement to a 5-step procurement, you should have a process owner in the business that is accountable for those 5 steps. And anything that comes along that impacts those 5 steps, that person owns that process, right? So when the patch comes through, and let's say they add in a 6th step, or 5B, or whatever it might be, that process owner, they look at this new patch that's coming through, and they determine how it impacts how the business actually uses it. Adopt, not adapt. So remember when I said that SaaS is built a certain way? We tend to call this the happy path best practice. It'll do about 80% of what you need, but some stuff it will not do, and it's understanding that. That 80% is the happy path. But chances are in oil and gas, there'll be something very specific to oil and gas that needs to happen. When you look at that, you need to realize that the SaaS system isn't going to necessarily cover that. In construction, there are certain things about being able to track how things related to earned value and the progress you're making on delivery and things like that, that certain these applications won't do. That's kind of an industry-specific requirement. So wherever you can, though, you identify what those are. Everything else, you're pushing the business to adopt that practice. What you can't do is to buy a SaaS solution and then force it into doing something that it wasn't designed to do. That's just bad news, because as soon as any upgrades happen, you're going to cause all sorts of problems. Power to the people. So invest in change. So this is a change program, change set of stuff for transformation. It is not tech-led. So when you're investing in people for the long term, it's looking at what is the long-term capability, what do we need to support this, what are the new types of functions and areas that we're going to be able to get into in the future as a result of doing this program. So it's investing in people. That is really key. Looking at the SOM model, what other people does that require? If you have a pretty thinly spread finance function right now, chances are that's not going to be enough to support this type of ecosystem going forward. So you got to think about that. Next tips are really just about the actual delivery itself. So we covered just kind of a run through of some of the strategy areas. So now let's say, okay, you've pulled it all together and how you're going to actually deliver something on the ground. This first one might sound slightly condescending, but I tell you, it is the most important thing. Show up. Sounds basic, but it is the #1 problem plaguing deliveries. It is people saying, they're just too busy. We got month end right now. Sorry. And that becomes a business priority and everything else waits. It happens all the time. So, okay, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So another thing to keep in mind, though. So it is not a quick run at this. These things take a long time, and the people certainly that you have on the program are going to get stressed out. They need to be empowered to make decisions, and there'll be a certain pace that this program will go at, and folks will get stressed. So it's important that if you have, let's say, a head procurement person, as an example, on the program, empower that person, trust that person to make decisions, and you have to give them that space to have that amount of autonomy so they can guide the rest of the program. The power of good enough is about, well, it really is just that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be good enough to take you to the next stop. That's usually sufficient. Things can churn and churn and churn because you're trying to get it absolutely right. You don't need that. Particularly a lot of these programs, they have multiple iterations as you go through builds anyway. You can add on stuff later. You just got to get that core. So generally speaking, 80% of the processes that these SaaS applications will do, you want to be consistent across the board. So if you're putting in a global application and you got procurement, 80% of all the procurement people around the world should be doing the same thing. For mix and match. This is a cool one. It's really about making sure that you're upskilling your teams as you go through it. It's kind of like live it and learn it type of thing. If you have an HR person, have them go sit in a finance workshop. Just have them do it. They don't need to say anything, don't need to do anything, but just be in the room. It gives an appreciation of what happens on the other side of the fence. All right, speak up and listen. Love this one. 70% of all communication is actually listening, not talking. Just hearing what people have to say. And one of the things we have to do in these types of change programs is to honor and appreciate what came before. So when you rock up and say, hey, everything here sucks, you're really talking about someone's life work. That's not cool, right? Because they have a lot of vested identity in that stuff. So it's acknowledging, hey, Bob, thank you so much for all these years of work that you've done contributing to getting us to this place. Now we want to see what you have to say about how we move forward, and give Bob a seat at the table. All right, This is my favorite one. Explain it to a 5-year-old. So I deal with all sorts of complex stuff all the time, you know, and I'll have all these architects or finance folks or supply chain, Six Sigma, quadruple green belt people talking to me about whatever. And I was like, look, just break this down for me like I'm a 5-year-old. Explain this to me, you know, and getting to the essence of stuff is so key. This is my second favorite one. Dry run, dry run, dry run. If there's one thing that I am known for on programs, is I methodically make folks do dry runs. So what people will tell you is that this stuff just works. Don't believe them. No matter who tells you anything about that you're ready to go live or you're ready to do this or do that, just assume they're lying. It's not true. Make people dry run. So when you're going through a design phase and they're drawing out these nice pretty pictures about how everything's going to be, and it has like 3 different departments in there involved in a process, make the leaders of each department show up and walk through their steps. Even if it's just on paper, it makes all the difference. Speak truth to power, as they say. We were talking a little bit earlier about how there's certain areas people just do things their way in a particular department. So you have all these, we call them fiefdoms, a whole cottage industry of activity where they got this pile of spreadsheets or whatever. Transparency is key. So shine a light on that mountain of spreadsheets, because you may find that when you're doing things like SaaS, the whole idea is to streamline and get rid of as much of that as possible. Enjoy the ride. And for that, this is really about making sure that you're bringing everyone along for that journey. That's what we've been talking about. So it can be seen, you know, if not handled right, as a very negative thing. But let's view it as a positive thing. And this is done with us, by us, for us. That really is what the narrative around programs like this should be. It is not being done to you. And by going in there early, talking to folks, making sure you have a holistic view, and bringing people through each decision that's being made, giving Bob a seat at the table, you start to get that. And then by the time you even get to the end of this thing, you know, they're pushing you away, going, you know, this is our system now, we have this. And that's where you want to get that to.